The Force is light and full of shadows.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The practice saber moves through the third gate of the Form IV opening sequence, and the body executing it is doing everything correctly. This is, by itself, unremarkable. Padawan Qui-Gon Jinn has been executing this sequence correctly for 2 years. What is happening behind the movement is something else entirely. The SAL has 7 high windows. 4 are catching the afternoon light, that specific amber of a city planet that never fully achieves dark, the light that filters through 200 kilometers of inhabited structure and arrives at training room height exhausted and golden. The training drone is set to progression level 3. The floor is Durasteel composite with rubberized grip surface, relayed 6 months ago. The color has not yet faded from its original gray. The observation line is marked in white at 3.2 meters from the sparring circle's edge, and the man standing at it has been standing at it for 11 minutes. None of this is the observation of a child noticing his surroundings. He knows who is standing at the observation line before he processes the visual. He knows the quality of that particular attention, still precise, complete, the way a musician knows a specific instrument entering a room. He does not need to look, he already knows. Then, between one breath and the next, everything shifts. It does not arrive like lightning. It arrives like a door opening in a room you are already standing in, and realizing, with the absolute certainty of a man who spent decades woven into the structure of the living force, that you are no longer where you were. The first information is physical. The lungs, small. They pull in less air per breath than the body expects, and the body responds by breathing faster, shallower, compensating. The heartbeat, too quick, positioned too high in the chest. The center of gravity, lower than he has known it in 30-something years, the weight of the torso distributed differently, closer to the ground, the geometry of movement rewritten by 10 or 12 kilograms he does not currently have, the grip on the practice saber, a small hand. He has small hands. He does not stop moving. The Form 4 sequence continues. The training drone advances on its predicted arc, and the body responds with 2 years of Padawan precision, and the mind behind it catalogs with the efficiency of someone who stopped spending time on shock decades ago. The SAL is Sub-SAL 7. He has spent thousands of hours in rooms like this one. The light is afternoon amber. The drone is at level 3. He is 13 years old. The year is 68 BBY. He does the calculation in the space between a high cut and its follow-through. He has approximately 36 years before Darth Maul's blade ends his life on Naboo, approximately 3 years before Plagueis finishes constructing his Naboo gambit and puts his hands on a 16-year-old noble, whose darkness is currently only potential, approximately 27 years before Anakin Skywalker is born into a life that should not become what it becomes. He has a narrower margin than he would have preferred, and a body that weighs roughly what moderately large luggage weighs, and a practice saber, and the accumulated judgment of a man who died once and watched the consequences for longer than he would like to calculate. The drone moves, his hands respond. 3 options assemble themselves with the clarity of a tactical assessment, each carrying its cost. He could stop, announce everything, request an immediate council audience, present his knowledge, submit to examination. The order would remove him from the field within the same afternoon, months with the healers. Evaluation, containment, deliberation. The Sith would operate freely while the Council composed a committee to consider the situation. This option costs everything and purchases nothing. He could perform, continue as the Padawan he appears to be, accumulate patience over years, wait for circumstances to develop openings. It is safe. It is also insufficient. Every month Plagueis operates without interference as structural damage that compounds. He does not have time for patience that looks like inaction from outside. The third option is narrower. Not a confession, not a performance, a demonstration. A single data point, offered without context, and allowed to do its work on the specific intelligence standing at the observation line. He chooses the third option. The drone completes its arc. His back foot shifts, a weight transfer of perhaps half an inch, the kind of micro-adjustment that does not register unless you are watching with the specific attention of someone who has spent 2 years studying this child's movement patterns. Then, in the center of the Form 5 rotation, he executes a counter-parry against an attack angle the drone has not committed to yet. Form 7, Juyo, the aggressive form, the demanding form, the form that requires not only technical mastery, but a practitioner old enough to carry genuine darkness, without drowning in it. He executes it the way a carpenter uses a tool they have owned for 30 years, without ceremony, without announcement, simply and correctly. The parry completes. The drone, receiving a counter to an attack it hadn't delivered, recalibrates with a mechanical stutter. He drops back into his Form 4 guard as though nothing has shifted. The sequence ends, the drone retreats to its dock, the SAL goes quiet. From the observation line, nothing moves. He can feel the attention change texture. Still the same stillness, but different now. The stillness of a calculation rather than observation. Dooku is not a man who explains the world to himself before gathering sufficient data. He is also not a man who mistakes coincidence for pattern when the pattern is too precise for coincidence. Again, he says. Qui-Gon executes it again. Identical weight shift, identical timing. The counter arrives at the same point in the rotation, occupies the same angle, completes with the same economy. Not the approximate recreation of someone trying to recall how they stumbled onto a movement, the exact, controlled repetition of someone performing something they have trained 10,000 times. Dooku crosses the floor, he stops 2 meters away. Qui-Gon turns to face him, and for a moment they stand in a 13-year-old sparring circle while the late afternoon light comes gold through the high windows. The distance between them is not 2 meters. It is the full weight of everything that will not happen in this lifetime if this conversation goes correctly. Dooku studies him. The brown eyes are precise, calibrating. Not warm, but not yet cold in the way they will eventually learn to be. He is 34 years old, and his intelligence has not yet calcified into the instrument of contempt it will one day become. He still believes that things seen clearly can be addressed clearly. He is looking at his Padawan and seeing something that does not fit, and he has the integrity not to look away from it. He says nothing for long enough that the sala begins to feel smaller. Then Qui-Gon speaks, his first chosen sentence in this life, not a response to a drill instruction, not a rote morning answer, but a decision. I've been practicing, Master. A pause, measured. The voice of a man who will not condescend to perform surprise when he is merely gathering information and will not perform confusion when he is simply waiting for more of it. I see that, says Dooku. He is dismissed for the evening meal without further questions. This is Dooku. He does not waste words on questions he cannot yet frame with precision. He will frame them. He will ask them. But not until he is certain exactly what he is asking. Qui-Gon walks the corridor outside Subsale 7, and the temple opens around him. The Force is louder in this body than he has known it in decades. As a ghost, it was everything and nothing simultaneously. He was in it, of it, the distinction between himself and the living current dissolved into something that had no edges. In this body it presses in from every direction, the midichlorians and the stone itself, in the recycled air moving through the corridor vents, in the hundreds of Force-sensitive beings whose signatures layer through the walls like light through stacked glass. There are thousands of Jedi in this building. He has not felt a full temple in a very long time. He stops at the entrance to the Padawan residential wing. He places one hand flat against the wall. The stone is genuinely old, older than the Republic's current configuration, older than most of the ideas that built it. He presses his palm against it and lets himself feel what is actually there. The age, the accumulated weight of generations of footsteps from people who trained here, who left, who lived whatever lives were given to them, whose deaths were, for most of them, not what his was. He counts to 3, not meditation, not mourning, simply 3 seconds in which he permits himself to register where he is and what it cost the Force to return it. He removes his hand, he walks on. He has 36 years. He will not waste a single morning of them. The study sessions begin 3 days after Subsal 7. Dooku does not mention what happened in the Sal. He does not ask questions he cannot yet frame with precision, and he cannot yet frame the right questions, so he does not ask them. What he does instead is more methodical. He constructs intellectual terrain and watches how his Padawan moves through it. Not a test, exactly. An assessment. The distinction matters to him, and so Qui-Gon allows it to matter. The first session covers the Jedi Code's relationship to Republican law, standard material for a Padawan at this level. Qui-Gon answers correctly, precisely, and without enthusiasm, which is not itself unusual. Many Padawans treat doctrine as recitation rather than thought. What is unusual is the quality of the silence afterward, the way Qui-Gon waits while Dooku prepares the follow-up question, the particular patience of someone who already knows what the follow-up will be and is giving the other person the courtesy of arriving there themselves. Dooku notices. He says nothing. The second session is the Sith Wars. The third session covers the Ruusan reformations, and this is where the terrain changes. Dooku presents the reformations the way the Order presents them, as the culmination of a 1,000-year effort to consolidate Jedi authority under a unified ethical framework, to subordinate individual interpretation to collective wisdom, to ensure that the scale of the Jedi-Sith conflict could never again define the fate of the galaxy. The most consequential act of institutional discipline in 3,000 years, he says. He is not reading from a text. This is his position, stated with the flatness of a man who has made peace with an argument he finds only partially convincing. Qui-Gon looks at the table between them for a moment. Then he says, "The reformations reduced the Jedi from a force that shaped history to a force that reacted to it. We became a response service dressed in the philosophy of guardianship." A silence. Not long, perhaps 3 seconds, Dooku has held this position in private for years. He has not said it aloud, because saying it aloud in the Order invites a particular kind of censure. Not hostile, but patient and wearing. The institutional weight of 10,000 practitioners whose identity is built on the thing you are questioning. He has found it easier to hold the thought quietly and work around its edges. He is hearing it now from a 13-year-old. "Elaborate," he says. Qui-Gon elaborates. He speaks for 6 minutes without notes, drawing a line from the Reformation's structural changes, the subordination of individual Jedi action to Senate authorization, the redefinition of Jedi deployment as reactive rather than preventive, through 3 specific moments in the last century where that structure failed the people it claimed to protect. He does not speak with a student's citation anxiety. He speaks with the unhurried precision of someone describing what they have personally witnessed. Dooku does not interrupt. When Qui-Gon finishes, he picks up his stylus, makes a notation on his datapad, and sets it down again. "You have been reading outside the curriculum," he says. It is not a question, and it is not quite an accusation. It is a reclassification, an attempt to fit what he is hearing into a category his existing model provides. "Yes," Qui-Gon says. He does not elaborate on what he has been reading, or when or how a Padawan at his level would have had both the access and the interpretive framework to produce what he just produced. He lets the word stand alone and watches Dooku decide how much weight to give it. Dooku gives it significant weight. He simply chooses, for the moment, not to show this. The weeks that follow establish something neither of them names. The dynamic of the session shifts, not dramatically, not through any declared renegotiation, but through the accumulated pressure of Qui-Gon meeting him on the terrain of ideas as an equal rather than a student. Dooku sets the topic. Qui-Gon engages with it not as material to be mastered, but as a problem he has already thought about. At length, from a vantage point Dooku does not yet understand. His pride, at 34, is genuine but not yet armored. He is still a man who believes the right opponent is a gift rather than a threat. He finds, over 6 weeks, that his Padawan is the most interesting conversation he has had in years. He files this observation under the same category as the Form 7 counterparry: real, precise, and not yet explained. 6 weeks after Sub-Sal 7, they are alone in a smaller Sal, late in the day. The training has finished. Dooku is reviewing a mission brief from the Council. Border Patrol, Mid-Rim, standard Padawan assignment. Qui-Gon is returning his practice saber to its rack. He says, without preamble, without turning around, "Have you heard of Hego Damask?" Dooku looks up from the brief. Immune financier, banking clan adjacent, Damask Holdings, respectable on paper, opaque underneath. A pause. Why? Qui-Gon turns. He walks to the bench across from Dooku and sits down, and the quality of the movement, unhurried, deliberate, the movement of someone settling in to say something they have been deciding exactly how to say for some time, registers in the back of Dooku's attention. Because he is the reason the Republic is going to collapse. Not hypothetically, not a warning about potential trajectories or systemic risks or concerning indicators. The future tense applied with the certainty of a man describing something he watched happen. Dooku sets down the datapad. Explain. Qui-Gon gives him 3 things. The first, the specific financial connection between Damask Holdings and 5 Senate votes over the past 8 years, votes on Trade Federation tariff disputes that had appeared unrelated at the time, and whose outcomes had benefited Damask Holdings subsidiaries in ways that required careful accounting work to trace. He names the votes, he gives the session dates. He describes the paper trail with the specificity of someone who has followed it to its end. The second, a prediction. Within 6 months, the Trade Federation will file for expanded customs enforcement jurisdiction in the Outer Rim Seswena sector. The filing will come through a proxy advocacy group rather than directly. The proxy's registered address is on Ariadu. He gives the address. The third, a name, a Senate aide, mid-level, assigned to the Commerce Committee. He describes the aide, gives his homeworld, his family connections, and the approximate payment amounts he has received over 3 years through an intermediary Qui-Gon names. He provides the intermediary's cover identity, a logistics coordinator for a shipping conglomerate with 4 shells between it and Damask Holdings. Then he stops. He does not explain how he knows. He does not qualify the information or provide sourcing or soften the specificity with uncertainty. He lets it sit between them the way a completed document sits on a desk, finished, factual, waiting to be read. Dooku is still for a long moment, then he picks up his datapad. Not to respond, to work. He opens the Senate's public voting archive and begins to cross-reference. The pattern is there. It is not legally provable. The connections require inference rather than evidence, and the inference requires knowing what you are looking for. But for a man of Dooku's intelligence, who has found the Senate's relationship with banking clan entities suspicious for years without being able to articulate exactly why, for that man seeing the pattern is like watching a blurred image sharpen. He works in silence for 12 minutes. Then, without looking up, what do we do with this? Not, how do you know this? Not, who are you and what is happening and how should I understand the last 6 weeks? The question he asks is the question of a strategist who has accepted the intelligence and moved to the operational problem it creates. That is the moment. The direct question comes 3 months after Subsale 7 on an evening after a mission debrief. The mission was standard, border patrol, nothing significant, a Padawan's assignment managed with a Padawan's visible effort, and something else underneath it that Dooku has spent 3 months cataloging without yet naming. They are alone. The temple has gone quiet around them. Dooku asks without preface, in the voice of a man who has waited until he is certain of the question's shape. What are you? A pause. Brief. I died, Qui-Gon says, struck down by a Sith on Naboo, protecting a boy who would have mattered to everything if I had lived long enough to matter to him. And then I spent a very long time watching the consequences, and then the Force put me back here. He meets Dooku's eyes, the brown eyes still capable of being reached, still carrying the active intelligence of a man who has not yet learned to use his own mind as a wall against the world. You made a terrible choice in 36 years, Qui-Gon says. I am here to ensure you do not make it. The silence that follows is not empty. Dooku is processing, not the way someone processes a shock with the involuntary stall of a mind refusing to integrate, but the way a genius processes a contradiction in his model, systematically, without panic, looking for where the model requires revision rather than where the new data must be wrong. You said I, he says finally, not the Force. I, yes, you believe you were sent. I believe the Force chose the available instrument. I don't claim to be exceptional. A pause. I claim to be willing. Dooku looks at him for a long time. He is 34 years old, and he is looking at the face of a 13-year-old boy, and behind that face is something he has no existing category for. Not a prodigy, not a fraud, not a vision or a delusion. Something that has seen more than he has, in a body that weighs less than his luggage. He sits down, he picks up his stylus. Tell me about these 36 years. What Qui-Gon tells him is not everything. It is precisely enough. He describes the shape of Dooku's fall, not as an accusation, not with the theatrical weight of revelation, but with the flat accuracy of a surveyor describing terrain. The grief that removes the anchor, the disillusionment that has nowhere legitimate to go. The man with patience and a purpose, who arrives at exactly the moment those two conditions align. He does not describe Dooku as a villain. He describes him as a man whose anchors broke in the right sequence at the right intervals, and who was not irrational in the conclusions he drew from their breaking. This, he understands, is more unsettling to Dooku than condemnation would have been. Condemnation can be rejected. Analysis has to be answered. Dooku listens without interruption. When Qui-Gon finishes, he sits for a moment with his stylus resting against the datapad, not writing, simply present with what he has been told. The boy, he says, the one you were protecting. Yes, he is not born yet. No, he will not be born for 27 years. And everything you are doing is toward that. It is not a question. Qui-Gon answers it anyway, because the answer is the most honest thing he has said in this life. And Dooku has earned honest things. Yes, another silence. Then Dooku opens a new document on his datapad. He pulls up the list, the one he began compiling 3 weeks ago, after the Damask conversation, working alone, names from the Senate, the banking clan, the Trade Federation, men and women who could be turned, or watched, or removed from the positions that make them useful to the wrong interests. He sets the datapad between them where they can both see it. He looks at Qui-Gon. Add what's missing, he says. Qui-Gon takes the stylus. He begins to write. They work until the temple's late-hour bells mark the end of the residential quiet period. And the list, by the time they finish, has 43 names on it and the beginning of a structure, which names require immediate attention, which can be managed over years, which are useful left in place if their actions can be shaped rather than stopped. It is not a finished document. It is the first draft of something that will require most of their remaining years together to complete. Dooku reads through the final page with the expression of a strategist recognizing the existence of a map he didn't know he needed until it was in front of him. This will take years, he says. I have 36 of them, Qui-Gon says. Dooku looks at the list. Something in his posture settles, not into comfort but into the specific alignment of a man who has found, after a long search he did not know he was conducting, a problem genuinely worth his attention. Then we had better not waste the morning, he says. The Trade Federation's shipping insurance arrangement has a flaw that its architects intended as a feature. It prices risk at the Republic level mean when its actual exposure is concentrated in 6 outer rim corridors that have been quietly degrading for 4 years. Anyone with access to the corridor level freight data could see the divergence. The data is public, nobody is looking at it. Qui-Gon is 16 years old in body, has been building patience since before most of these corridors existed, and has been looking at this particular divergence for 6 weeks. He marks the document and sends it to Dooku without annotation. The annotation is not necessary. They have been working this way for over a year. Qui-Gon generates the intelligence. Dooku determines its operational application. The division is not official. Nothing about what they are doing is official. The Sereno family wealth is real and old, and by the standards of the Republic's established houses, not especially large, substantial enough to generate social credibility, not substantial enough to generate scrutiny. This is precisely what they need. Dooku structures 2 positions through a legitimate Sereno family holding. One hedged against the Trade Federation's insurance overexposure, one positioned against a banking clan mining bond arrangement that overstates outer rim extraction revenues by a factor Qui-Gon identified from memories of people who would eventually investigate the collapse that nobody in the original history was going to prevent. He does not know the exact figures. 50-year-old directional recollections do not carry precise decimal points. He knows which way the ground is falling and which way to step off it. The positions close over 18 months. The capital that flows into the holding is significant without being remarkable, enough to fund a decade of operations, small enough to sit unremarked in the records of a family with generations of investment history. Dooku does not celebrate this. Qui-Gon does not celebrate it. They log the outcome and move to the next item. Qui-Gon builds the contact network from the outside in. He does not attend any of the meetings. He is 15, then 16, physically, and the people worth meeting will not trust a Padawan's face regardless of what is behind it. He is the intelligence source. Dooku is the door. The names Qui-Gon provides are specific in ways that require no explanation beyond the name itself. A freight captain operating in the Siswena sector, a woman with a modified manifest system that is technically compliant with Republic customs law and practically invisible to it, who will, in 30 years, move weapons to a planetary resistance that shouldn't have been able to resist anything. A former intelligence officer who retired on medical grounds 7 years ago and has not explained those grounds to anyone, who maintains contact with 12 active field operatives out of professional habit and a particular kind of stubbornness, an information broker on Nar Shaddaa who sells to the highest bidder with the consistency of a postal service, and the archival habits of someone who understands that records are only a liability if you cannot control who reads them. Dooku meets each of them personally over months. He is a respected Jedi Knight with independent wealth, impeccable references, and the social fluency of a Sereno aristocrat who has spent 30 years navigating institutions more complex than the people running them. Trust is established before any operational request is made. In some cases, years before. What they are building is not yet useful. What they are building is the infrastructure that makes useful things possible. There is a difference, and it requires a patience that Qui-Gon spent his Force Ghost years learning to carry without weight. The cartography takes longer than the finance and the contacts combined, because it is assembled from memory alone, and memory, even a former Force Ghost's memory, is not a database. He knows the broad geography. He knows a moon called Sojourn exists, that it is Plagueis's private retreat, that its system does not feature prominently in Republic navigation records, because Damask Holdings' privacy is institutional and expensive. He knows, approximately, where Sidious eventually sent his most sensitive operational assets, which implies certain transit nodes, certain stations, certain neutral ground locations useful to someone who needed discretion at scale. He does not know coordinates. He works from what he remembers toward what he can locate. The document, when it is finally assembled and encrypted with a cipher Qui-Gon built from a Jedi archival protocol that will not be standardized for another 20 years, is not a plan, it is preparation. The distinction is not academic. A plan requires a timeline, and a plan can be premature. Preparation simply waits. He locks the file and gives it an archive name that means nothing to anyone who does not already know what to look for. The corridor outside the Padawan study hall is busy at the midday hour. He walks through it, returning a borrowed text to the temple library, and a group of Padawans his physical age pass him going the other direction. They are discussing the following week's evaluation, the kind of conversation with concentrated shared anxiety, the texture of people who care about something that will not matter in 2 years. He looks at their faces. Not long, a second. He does the calculation the way he always does it now. Which names did he hear, during the Force Ghost years, attached to the words was killed and was lost, and did not survive? He does not always know. The knowledge is directional, not complete. But some names across those years had attached to faces, and some of those faces are young enough that they are here now, discussing evaluations in a corridor that still stands, in a temple that is still full. He does not know how to hold this information in a way that is livable. He has been trying for 2 years and has not yet found the method. What he has found is how to keep it from being visible. He returns the book. He goes to train. He trains beyond what the curriculum requires. Not for ambition, he has none, in the ordinary sense. Not for competition, because competing with other Padawans at his physical level stopped being informative after the first month, and the social consequence of doing it consistently is not one that serves him or them. He trains because there is nothing else to do with 40 years of experience and a teenager's daily schedule. The hours he cannot fill with operational work, he fills with the construction of a body that will need to be exceptional when what is coming requires it to be. He runs Form-5 combinations until his shoulders ache in the specific way that means the connective tissue is adapting. He moves through Form-3 defensive sequences with the methodical repetition of someone not building a skill, but rebuilding one they already perfected, in a frame that is not yet ready to hold it. Dooku notices the extra hours and does not comment on them directly. He adds field assignments instead. A border patrol extended by 2 weeks, a diplomatic courier task with a layover at a Seswena sector station, where by coincidence one of the contact network's freight captains is running her quarterly maintenance stop. Useful things to do with restless competence. It is, Qui-Gon understands, the closest approximation of care that Dooku knows how to offer someone he cannot officially have an emotional investment in. He accepts it without naming it. The sign comes in the 3rd year of operations, not from a field contact or a force sense, but from the monitoring data itself. He is reviewing the rolling indicators, the ongoing surveillance of Damask Holdings' intermediary network, when he finds it. An analysis running parallel to the Trade Federation insurance position they closed 18 months ago. Not investigating him, there is no trace of him in any public record. Investigating the anomaly. The pattern of financial movements that implied someone had known which way the ground was falling before the fall was visible. The analysis is sophisticated, beyond what a standard banking clan risk officer would run. It has the patience of something that has been watching market behavior for longer than any individual career could account for. And underneath the analytical structure, pressing against the edge of his perception like a cold hand flat against the other side of a door, there is a force texture he recognizes. Old, unhurried, deliberate in the way that things are deliberate when they have had a very long time to learn how to wait. He closes the terminal. He sits with it for a moment, not from uncertainty, but from the discipline of not acting before the thought is complete. Then he goes to find Dooku. It is evening. Dooku is reading, the lamp on and the rest of the room in near dark, which is how he prefers to work when the content requires sustained attention. He looks up when Qui-Gon enters without knocking. They abandoned that formality 6 months ago by unspoken mutual agreement, and registers something in the way Qui-Gon crosses the room and sits that causes him to set the book face down. "We've been noticed," Qui-Gon says. Dooku does not ask if he is certain. He stopped asking that in the second year after the Trade Federation prediction arrived within 3 weeks of the time frame Qui-Gon specified. By whom? The thing I intend to kill. The room holds the weight of that for a moment. Dooku is not a man who needs long. Before or after we're ready, Qui-Gon runs it. Plagueis is still consolidating, still in the process of building the architecture that will allow him to operate at the scale the grand plan eventually requires. He has found an anomaly in his financial data, an anomaly implying a sophisticated patient, well-resourced actor moving on correct information. He is not yet pointing at a face. He is not yet pointing at a name. He is doing what a careful predator does when it hears something in the dark. He is listening more closely. They have time, less than wanted. After, Qui-Gon says, "But the margin is smaller than I wanted." Dooku is quiet for a moment. He picks up the book. He does not open it. "Then we stop being careful," he says, "and start being fast. We stop being slow," Qui-Gon says. "There's a difference." Dooku looks at him across the dim room. The expression is one he has produced perhaps 4 times across the last 3 years. The look of a man who arrived at a conclusion and found the same conclusion already waiting for him, in a face that is 17 years old and carries something considerably older behind the eyes. He opens the book. The conversation is over. The margin is smaller than wanted. The work continues. The confirmation arrives not as a single moment, but as the last tile placed in a mosaic that Qui-Gon has been assembling for 4 years. He already knew. He has known since before the first tile was laid. The work was never for him. It was for Dooku. The final piece is a name, a Republic investigator, mid-level, assigned to banking clan audit compliance, who died of a cardiac event 14 months ago at 41 years old in excellent health. The investigator's last filed report, which was never reviewed by his supervisor because his supervisor's appointment was quietly influenced by a Damask Holdings intermediary, contains 6 pages of traced financial movement between a Moonalinced shell entity and 3 Senate committee chairmen. The report is in a sealed archive. Dooku obtained it through channels that required both his Jedi authority and 3 weeks of patience. He reads it once, sets it down. A Sith Lord, he says, running the banking clan's shadow ledger, hiding in plain sight for how long? Long enough, Qui-Gon says, to make one of them chancellor within 20 years. Dooku is quiet with this in the specific way he is quiet when the conclusion is correct and unwelcome simultaneously. Outside the window, Coruscant's endless light pushes against the dark with the indifference of a city that has never needed to be aware of itself to function. "We bring this to the Council," Dooku says. "We do not." The words are flat. Not a refusal, a statement of operational reality, delivered the way Qui-Gon delivers everything that matters, without inflection that could be mistaken for negotiation. He lays it out. The Council will investigate. The investigation will require evidentiary standards that Plagueis spent decades designing specifically to frustrate. Every connection is deniable, every death is natural, every financial trail terminates at an entity whose own records are clean. The process will take years, and Plagueis, once aware that the Council is moving, will do what a careful predator does when the light changes. He will adjust his position, accelerate his timeline, and have a Naboo noble already in hand before the first committee convenes. The window they currently occupy, post-Tenebris, pre-Palpatine, a single point of failure operating without redundancy, is closing. It will not open again. Dooku listens to this without interruption. He is a rule of law man by formation, and what Qui-Gon is describing is its deliberate circumvention by the people best positioned to enforce it. This is not comfortable for him. He does not pretend it is. "Then we act ourselves," he says finally. "Not agreement, arithmetic." The plan is straightforward because straightforward is the only thing a plan can be when its target has had decades to complicate every alternative. Dooku contacts Damask Holdings through a legitimate investment inquiry, the kind that Plagueis' cover identity cannot ignore without visible inconsistency. The correspondence is precise, formally deferential, and carries the implicit weight of a Sereno family name attached to a number of credits that would be interesting to any financial institution operating in the legitimate economy. Plagueis agrees to a meeting. Qui-Gon, when Dooku tells him this, files the information and moves on. He does not remark on the fact that Plagueis' agreement confirms what they already knew, that the Force signature at the edges of their financial anomaly has been his attention, and that his attention Finding a credible pathway toward the source of the anomaly has moved toward it. He is curious. Plagueis is always curious. It is his most useful vulnerability and his most dangerous quality, and both of those are currently pointing at them. The meeting is set for Sojourn. The night before, they plan with the precision of people who understand that precision is the only margin they have. Dooku asks the question that he has clearly been holding for some time. Has anyone ever killed a Sith Lord? Yes, Qui-Gon says. Several times, history records it as impossible each time and then records the death immediately after. Dooku looks at him with the expression he has worn perhaps twice across 6 years, the one that is not quite a smile and not quite exasperation, but contains elements of both. That is the least reassuring accurate statement I have heard. Qui-Gon briefs him on what he knows of Plagueis's capabilities. Not a duelist by primary training, his strength is in manipulation specifically of midi-chlorians, which means the force connection of his opponents is something he can treat as a variable rather than a fixed condition. He can suppress. He can introduce noise into a force-sensitive's perception. He is physically formidable for a moon but not elite by the standard of someone who trained exclusively for combat. His greatest vulnerability, he has never been seen. Being seen is a state he does not have a well-developed response to. 2 objectives: confirm identity in person, then act. They will not get a second approach at this level of surprise, and Qui-Gon does not explain how he knows this because the explanation would take longer than they have. Sojourn is beautiful in the way that things owned by people of great wealth and no conscience are often beautiful. Complete, undisturbed, immune to the compromises that other places make when they need to accommodate the ordinary world. The retreat facility is built into a ridge overlooking a valley that has not been altered since Plagueis acquired the moon, which is a long time ago. The architecture is moon, clean geometry, cool colors, the visual language of institutions that have never had to justify themselves to anyone who wasn't already persuaded. They are met at the facility's entrance by a staff member who is precisely as warm as his professional role requires and no warmer, and escorted through corridors where the art on the walls is original and the silence is maintained by design rather than circumstance. Plagueis is already in the reception room when they enter. Moon-tall, lean with an age that does not advertise itself in obvious terms, moving with the controlled economy of something that has had a very long time to calibrate its relationship with its own body. The face is composed in a way that is worse than monstrous. Monstrousness announces itself and can be accounted for. This face has decided, somewhere far back, that expression is a resource to be spent with the same careful deliberation as every other resource, and has been operating on that decision ever since. The eyes move constantly, not nervously, cataloging everything and everyone in the room, assigned a value and a position, updated with each new piece of information. They find Qui-Gon across the reception space. Something happens in that finding. Not a visible event, nothing that the staff member would register, nothing that the room's atmosphere would record. 2 Force users, one hiding everything and one hiding everything, each recognizing the other's concealment without being able to read beneath it. Plagueis finds a depth in this teenager that does not fit any category he has for teenagers. Qui-Gon finds exactly what he already knew was there, and underneath the confirmation running parallel to it like a second current, the specific information of exactly where to strike. Neither of them shows any of this. Plagueis extends the courtesy of the meeting, gracious, attentive, professionally curious about the investment inquiry. Dooku handles the conversation with the fluency of a man born into rooms like this one. Qui-Gon contributes 2 carefully placed observations about Outer Rim mineral extraction trends that are accurate, useful, and designed to confirm to Plagueis that the financial anomaly he has been tracking does indeed terminate somewhere in this room. 17 minutes into the meeting, Qui-Gon ends it. It does not go as planned. This was always a possibility. He calculated 70%, a clean resolution, 2 experienced opponents against a target who is not primarily a combatant, in a room he has had time to map. 30% is not a small number. He knew what 30% looked like before they landed. Plagueis' dark side suppression is specific to living force attunement. This is not incidental. This is a technique designed over decades of working against force-sensitive opponents whose connection to the present moment is their primary instrument. Against most Jedi, it creates uncertainty. Against Qui-Gon, whose attunement is the deepest in the Order, it does something more precise. It turns signal into noise. The living force, which has been pressing against him since he woke in a 13-year-old's body, becomes suddenly indistinct, not absent, not blocked, but blurred. The room fills with interference where clarity was. He adapts. He has 40 years of experience adapting to conditions that were not what he planned for. He works through the noise, fighting on form and memory, and the technical precision that does not require the Force to be clear. It is slower. It is less certain. It is sufficient. Dooku is not sufficient. The injury is to his sword arm. Plagueis, it becomes clear, is more physically developed than Qui-Gon's information on moon physiology suggested. The arm is not severed. It is, by the time the facility's alarm system engages, triggered by something in the fight. Possibly the wall, possibly Dooku, certainly not planned, badly compromised. He keeps his blade up. He is Dooku, and Dooku does not lower his blade for pain. The alarm separates them. In the three-way confusion of the fight, the facility's emergency protocols, and the rapid deployment of Damask holding security from the building's lower levels, Plagueis moves toward an exit that Qui-Gon did not have mapped, and is gone before the operational calculation on whether to follow him completes. The moon is in lockdown within 90 seconds. They extract through a pre-planned route that accounts for building lockdown but not for Dooku's arm, which means the extraction takes longer than it should and involves Dooku performing a sustained physical task on a limb that is refusing to cooperate through something that Qui-Gon recognizes as the specific expression of a man applying enormous will to a body that has arrived at the edge of what will is able to produce. They clear the moon's atmosphere. Dooku is white-faced and controlled and bleeding in a way that the ship's basic medkit is going to address imperfectly. Qui-Gon is already certain of the failure before they jump to hyperspace. Dooku speaks when the stars stretch. His voice is level with the effort of making it level. You said he could be killed. He can, Qui-Gon says. I misjudged his development. He's further along than my information suggested. Tenebris must have accelerated his final years. A pause. That's my error. He runs the calculation. Plagueis is wounded. The fight was not without cost to him, and Plagueis' physical recovery will take weeks. But Plagueis is also alerted in a way he was not this morning. He is no longer operating under the assumption that his cover is complete. The anomaly has a direction now, possibly a face, certainly a Force signature that he will have catalogued with the same careful attention he gives everything. An alerted predator does not retreat. It accelerates. In the Force, distant, directional, already in hyperspace, Qui-Gon traces the path of Plagueis' departure. The direction is south, toward the Chamel sector, toward Naboo. He is moving toward the boy. Earlier than scheduled, earlier than the original timeline. Earlier because they pushed him. We've accelerated his timeline, Qui-Gon says. Dooku says nothing for a moment. He is applying pressure to his arm with the economy of someone who has decided that acknowledging pain directly is not a productive use of the attention he currently needs for other things. By how much? Enough that the next move has to be different. Qui-Gon looks at the hyperspace lines. We needed more time on Naboo. Now we have less. He logs it. The first real mistake of the mission, not the failed assassination, which was a known probability, but the consequence he did not fully calculate. He does not dwell on it. Dwelling is a form of spending time he does not have. He begins calculating the correction. The summons arrives, written in the language the Council uses when it wants to be careful. A formal request for a conversational meeting, which is to say a meeting where no formal record will be filed, but every word spoken will be weighed and retained by the people in the room. The distinction matters to the Council. It is, Qui-Gon has come to understand, an institution that is very precise about the difference between what it knows and what it can be said to know. He tells Dooku he will attend alone. He does not frame it as a suggestion. They will read you as the enabler, he says. The senior knight who has been allowing his Padawan to operate outside sanctioned channels for 6 years. Let them read me as the primary. You are more useful intact than absorbed into whatever this investigation becomes. Dooku's expression does the thing it does when he has reached the same conclusion independently and resents being told it. A controlled absence of reaction. I will not be waiting in the corridor, he says. I know. Qui-Gon says. Wait somewhere useful. The chamber that convenes is reduced. Not the full council, which Qui-Gon notes without surprise. The full council signals formal proceedings. 4 masters, Yoda, and 2 others whose names he knows and whose fates he knows, and whose faces in this meeting carry the specific stillness of people who are very powerful and genuinely uncertain which of those conditions is more appropriate to the moment. They have been watching something they cannot classify for 5 years. The experience has not been comfortable for them. He enters. He does not wait to be invited to speak. I have been shown consequences, he says, standing in the chamber's center with the particular quality of stillness he has had since he was 13. Not a young man's stillness, not cultivated composure, but the stillness of something that has stopped needing to prove what it is, not visions. The Force does not grant me a narrative of events to report to a committee. What I was shown is the result, decades forward, of specific choices this order makes in the next 30 years. The result is not recoverable. I am attempting to prevent the specific choices that lead to it. The silence that follows is the kind that contains multiple people deciding simultaneously whether to speak. One of the senior masters, he does not remember this man's face from his Force Ghost years, which means the man died before the worst of it began, speaks first. The Sith have been extinct for 1,000 years. What catastrophe are you claiming to prevent? Their extinction was assumed, Qui-Gon says. The assumption was wrong. The silence after this is different in quality, not deliberative, something closer to a room adjusting to an atmospheric change, the way a pressurized space registers the moment a seal breaks, not loudly, but in every surface at once. That is a very serious claim. Yes, he moves forward exactly one step, not aggressive, simply present. I have 3 pieces of evidence I will offer you. They are small enough to be verifiable within 2 years. They are specific enough that no reasonable guess could produce them. I am asking you to watch for them, and I am asking that when they occur, you remember what I said before they did. He gives them the first, a specific Trade Federation legislative initiative currently in internal drafting stages, which will fail for reasons that will appear to be internal dissent, but will in fact be financial pressure applied through intermediary entities connected to a Moonalinced holding company. The failure will be reported as a minor procedural collapse. It will occur within 14 months. The second, a banking clan compliance officer currently assigned to Outer Rim audit review. In approximately 9 months, he will be found dead in his quarters on a station in the Seswena sector. The death will be filed as cardiac failure. He is 43 years old and in documented excellent health, and the report he filed 3 weeks ago has not been reviewed by his supervisor because his supervisor's recent appointment was influenced by the same Moonalinced holding company. The report will be sealed before the end of the year. The third, a political appointment on Naboo, a mid-level position in the City of Theed's civic administration, that will be filled within 2 years through what will appear to be a standard selection process. The selected individual will have received financial support for their candidacy from a shell entity with no visible connection to the holding company, and 4 visible connections to it that require sustained forensic work to locate. He gives them enough. Not so much that the information appears manufactured, specific enough that when the events arrive, and they will arrive, he is not speculating about any of them, the Council will not be able to explain away his foreknowledge without confronting what the foreknowledge implies. The 4 masters exchange no visible signals. They do not need to. They are people who have spent decades in proximity with each other in precisely this room. We will observe, the senior master says finally, and we will speak again when there is something to speak about. It is dismissal framed as continuity. He accepts it for what it is. Yoda asks to speak with him before he leaves the spire. The meditation chamber is small, an anteroom adjacent to the main council space, used for the kind of conversations the council wants to have without the council's collective weight behind them. The city's light comes through the narrow window at a low angle, the particular copper of late afternoon on a planet that has replaced its sky with itself. They sit across from each other on the floor cushions, an 828-year-old grandmaster and a teenager who is neither of those things, and both of them aware of what they are looking at. Yoda studies him for a long time. The expression is one Qui-Gon has not seen on this face before, not in his first life, not in his Force Ghost years, because he was not looking for it, and because he was not standing 2 meters away in a body that the living Force was running through with the particular clarity of a young frame unburdened by the damage that age accumulates. Yoda is doing what Yoda does. He is reading the Force signature in front of him and finding something that does not fit his existing categories, and he is unlike most beings in that situation, not attempting to force a fit. "Lived before you have," he says quietly. "In your eyes I see it, old grief in a young face." Qui-Gon meets his eyes. He sees the man who spent 19 years in a swamp on Dagobah, feeding on exile and the specific punishment of outliving your usefulness through your own failure to prevent what you should have prevented. He sees the man who trained Dooku, the finest student he ever produced, he said, once in the Force Ghost years, when there was no one to hear it, and lost him not to a sudden darkness, but to the slow accumulation of small failures that Yoda catalogued afterward with the meticulous grief of a scholar annotating his own mistakes. He sees the man who gave Obi-Wan everything: discipline, knowledge, legitimacy within the Order, an unimpeachable foundation. Everything except the one thing that would have mattered most, which was the conversation about attachment that the Code made impossible to have honestly. He sees a very old man who died knowing the galaxy would be saved by the son of the Chosen One, rather than the Chosen One himself, and who carried the weight of that specific knowledge into the Force with the patience of someone who had practiced patience long enough that it had become indistinguishable from peace. He does not feel anger. He has not felt anger toward Yoda in a long time. What he feels is the sorrow that is specific and complete, the way grief is specific and complete for someone you loved in a life that is finished, whose failures you have made peace with because peace was the only available option, and also the correct one. Yes, he says, I have. Yoda's ears do not move. His gaze holds steady, reading something it cannot fully name. Warn us? You cannot? Fully? I can warn you of patterns. I have been warning you. He does not elaborate on the 6 years of operational work that has preceded this conversation, because Yoda does not need the enumeration. He has been aware of the patterns for at least 4 of those years, and has been deciding, with the careful deliberation of someone who treats inaction as a choice rather than a default, what to do with the awareness. Watch the banking clan. Watch Naboo. Watch what moves toward the Chommel sector in the next year, and what moves away from it. And when a moment arrives that requires acting against something before it acts against everyone, do not allow the perfect to become the enemy of the necessary. Yoda is quiet for a moment. When he speaks, it is in the particular register that Qui-Gon recognizes from a handful of moments across a very long life. The voice the Master uses when he is asking something he already knows the answer to because he needs the answer stated rather than implied. Act against children, you would ask? The silence that follows is not absence. It is a space occupied by the weight of what he is about to say, and he makes himself feel the full weight of it before he speaks. Because it deserves that. Because it deserves to be carried consciously rather than spoken around. I would ask you to act against the capacity for catastrophic darkness before it becomes catastrophe. He holds Yoda's gaze. How that is accomplished is a question for wisdom. I am not the appropriate instrument for every answer. I am telling you that the question will arrive, that it will not be comfortable, and that the answer that preserves the most life is not always the answer that the Code provides cleanly. Yoda looks at him. Not through him, at him, with the attention of someone taking a very precise measurement. They sit in silence for a time. The city light through the window shifts almost imperceptibly, the copper deepening toward the color that precedes evening. Somewhere in the building below them, the temple's ordinary life continues. Training sessions, meal hours, the accumulated daily weight of thousands of people living inside an institution that believes, without examining the belief, that the worst has already happened. Then Yoda speaks. His Shatterpoint ability has been reading the fault lines in Qui-Gon's presence throughout the session, the specific fractures and rebuilt places, where something has broken and been reconstructed, where the structure of a person carries the evidence of what it survived. Mace Windu, seated beside him, has been perceiving those same lines with the forensic patience of someone who will not name what he sees until he is certain of the name. They do not consult each other. They do not need to. Trust you, I will, Yoda says finally. For now. Not endorsement, not absolution. A provisional grant of operational latitude from the most powerful voice in the Order, offered in a room where nothing said can be officially recorded. It is enough. The formal inquiry produces no action, no mandate, no sanction, no assigned oversight. The Council observes the anomalies in Dooku's mission filings with the studied curiosity of an institution that has decided, tacitly, that the question of their origin is less important than the question of their outcome. Within 6 weeks, 2 things change. The first, the Council's formal inquiry requests into Dooku's non-standard mission classification stop arriving, not suspended, simply absent in the way that a pressure that was present and is now gone makes itself known through its cessation. The second, Sifo Dyas receives a new assignment, long-term Outer Rim threat assessment, coordinating with Knight Dooku on an ongoing basis. The title is administrative. Behind the title, Qui-Gon reads the decision clearly. A Jedi whose prophetic visions have been generating institutional discomfort for years, redirected toward the one context where the visions might be an asset rather than a liability. Yoda has given them a third person. They now have Dooku, whose access to the Order's institutional structures and whose inherited wealth fund the operation. Sifo Dyas, whose genuine prophetic gifts align with enough of what Qui-Gon knows to make him useful in ways that do not require full disclosure. And Qui-Gon himself, who is 22 years old in body and carries the weight of what is coming in the part of himself that is not 22 at all. Three people who know the shape of what is coming, and the quiet permission, never stated, of the one voice in the Order with the standing to grant it. He does not allow himself to feel relieved. Relief is for moments that are finished, and this one is not finished. But he permits himself to register that the configuration is better than it was, that the margin he has been working with has been slightly expanded by an old man in a small room who looked at his face and read something true in it. The work continues. The margin, expanded, waits to be used. The years that follow are not one story. They are many. Specific, dated, edited here for the weight they carry rather than their chronological completeness. 8 years of sustained operational work do not narrate themselves cleanly. What they produce is a record of small victories, 2 significant losses, and 1 conversation that matters more than any of the victories. This is that record. Palpatine arrives at the Temple's academic program in the late autumn of the year, and he is not what the program administrators expected. They expected a politically ambitious young noble using Jedi access as a social credential, a familiar type, handled by the program structure with the practiced ease of an institution that has seen the type many times. What they receive instead is someone who reads everything the library provides and comes back asking questions that the archivists have to retrieve senior research fellows to answer. His interest in constitutional history is not performed. His analysis of the Senate's structural corruption, compiled in a private document he never shows anyone but that Qui-Gon reads once, through channels he does not explain, is more precise than most serving senators could produce. He does not become good. But he becomes different. The ambition is unchanged. It is a fixed point, structural, not addressable through education. What the education addresses is the relationship between the ambition and the instrument it reaches for. In the original history, the instrument offered to him was the dark side, framed by a patient teacher as liberation from the mediocrity he already despised. Here, the instrument is legitimate. Institutional access, intellectual credibility, the specific currency that moves in Senate corridors and does not require a Sith Lord's tutelage to spend. A brilliant man learning to want something he can actually have. It is not salvation, it is sufficiency. Qui-Gon accepts this without requiring it to be more. Plagueis approaches Palpatine in the spring, through an intermediary with clean enough credentials that the approach reads as a business introduction. He has recalculated since Sojourn, he is always recalculating, and arrived at the conclusion that the Naboo noble can still be useful if reached through the correct door. He does not account for what 5 years of exposure to Force-sensitive practitioners does to a person's ability to recognize the feeling of being assessed by someone who is concealing their real interest. Palpatine has spent 5 years watching Jedi read rooms. He knows what it looks like when someone is looking at you and calculating something they are not saying. He reports the contact to his program coordinator within the hour. The report is factual, specific, and mentions that the intermediary's attention felt predatory in a way he could not precisely articulate but was not willing to dismiss. Dooku handles the follow-up. He is thorough in ways that do not leave records. Plagueis withdraws. He does not panic. He is not built for panic. He recalculates again. The recalculation produces something more dangerous than the original plan. If the primary instrument is unavailable, the grand plan has 2 remaining paths: find another vessel, or abandon the political mechanism entirely and pursue the primary objective. Midi-chlorian mastery, the prevention of death, the culmination of decades of biological research, through direct means. Without the need for an emperor, without the need for a political structure at all, he retreats into the laboratory, and they lose him. Sojourn is burned. He abandoned it the day after they extracted from the moon. The network of financial intermediaries, most of which Qui-Gon and Dooku have mapped, goes quiet in a pattern that implies deliberate restructuring rather than collapse. For 2 years, between 57 and 55 BBY, the signal disappears into the noise of the outer rim, and what remains is the Force sense, old, cold, moving, somewhere in the vast arc of the galaxy's underlit edge, pursuing a research agenda that has no bureaucracy and no accountability, and no external timeline. These are the 2 years that teach Qui-Gon what the middle of a long operation actually feels like from the inside. Not the patient efficiency of the early work. The specific experience of having built something carefully and then watching the thing you built it against Step out of your reach with the unhurried confidence of something that has all the time it believes it needs. He runs in the mornings, he trains in the evenings. He reviews the surveillance data every day and finds nothing useful in it. He does not allow himself to mistake the absence of progress for the presence of failure. Sifo Dyas comes to Dooku's study in the early morning, and what he says is the first thing that has felt like real information in 2 years. He stands in the doorway for a moment before speaking, the posture of someone who has learned, through long experience with his own visions, to give himself a few seconds before saying things aloud, because saying them aloud commits them to a reality that is sometimes uncomfortable to inhabit. Then he says, quietly, "The darkness I was seeing, the mass death, the Order's end. It's changed." Dooku looks up from the desk. "Changed how?" "It's still there," Sifo Dyas says, "but it's further, like a fire that's been moved back from a building rather than extinguished." He sits down across from Dooku without being invited, which is something he only does when what he has to say cannot wait for courtesy. "We've done something. I can feel the shape of what's different. I can't see the mechanism, but the outcome space is wider than it was. There's room in it now for things that weren't possible before." Dooku puts down the datapad. "Can you read a direction, location, anything specific?" Sifo Dyas considers. He is careful with his visions in the way of someone who has been wrong enough times to know the difference between clear signal and the mind's tendency to complete patterns it has only been given partial access to. "South," he says finally, "desert. Something is going to be born that matters enormously." He stops. Dooku waits. He has learned to wait for Sifo Dyas. It's going to be born into. Another pause, longer this time. Either chains or freedom. I can't see which. I think it's not decided yet. I think the outcome is being decided right now. And choice is being made right now by people who may not know what the choice is. He looks at Dooku with the expression of a man who has reported many fragments over the years and cannot always tell which ones matter until long after. Dooku tells Qui-Gon the same evening. Qui-Gon, who has known since the Force Ghost years what is going to be born in the desert and approximately when and into what, listens to the full account without interrupting. When Dooku finishes, he is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "Good. The Force is paying attention." Dooku studies him. "You knew this." "I knew the birth. I didn't know the Force was allowing it to be felt from this distance." He looks at the window, at the city beyond it, the endless coruscant light that never gives the dark enough room to be complete. "It means the timeline is holding. What we've done has held it far enough that the Force can see the shape of what's coming and is adjusting." "Is that what you're calling it? Adjusting?" "I don't have better language for it, neither does anyone else." He passes his trials in his 22nd year in body, and the Council describes the results to each other in language that does not appear in any official record, because there is no language in the official records for what they observed. He is granted the rank of Jedi Knight. 3 months later, he requests formal leave. The documentation lists it as a living force immersion mission, extended duration, outer rim focus, no fixed return date. This is an unusual request, but not unprecedented. The Order has granted similar leaves before, to practitioners whose connection to the living force required sustained engagement with environments the temple cannot provide. The Council approves it without calling another session. Yoda's signature is on the form, and his signature makes the matter closed. He tells Dooku privately the day before he leaves. "The next chapter happens in the desert," he says. Dooku absorbs this, alone. "You would stand out. I am an aristocratic Jedi Master in his 60s who has spent 30 years being read in every room I enter as someone of consequence. Yes." A pause. "I would stand out. How long?" Qui-Gon does the arithmetic. Shmi Skywalker is 17. He needs to locate her path toward vulnerability before it closes into the certainty of enslavement, establish something safe and real and durable, and be present in the right place for what comes in 14 years. The desert is not a short assignment. "Years," he says. "Possibly longer. The Force will tell me when it's finished." Dooku looks at him with the expression he has produced perhaps 6 times in 22 years. The one that is not quite sentiment, because sentiment is not something he allows himself in operational contexts, but contains everything sentiment would contain in a person who permitted it. "I'll handle the political work." "I know," Qui-Gon says. "They do not say anything else. There is nothing else that requires saying." 22 years of working in the same direction without announcing what it means to either of them has produced a shorthand that operates below the level of language, and they are both intelligent enough to know that language applied to it now would only reduce it. He packs light. In the silver of the temple's earliest morning, before the training halls have opened and before the residential wing has stirred, he walks through the corridors he has known since he was 13 years old. In this life, in this body, in the 36 years he was given to spend better than the last time, he does not look back. He does not need to. He knows what is behind him. 2 decades of careful work, a partner who will continue it, a prophetic colleague who is now seeing futures with cleaner edges, and a young man on Naboo who is learning, in the legitimate channels of the Republic's political structures, what power costs when it has to be earned rather than handed. He knows what is in front of him, sand and heat, and a woman he needs to find, and a child who has not yet been born, and Plagueis somewhere in the dark, still moving, still researching, still unaware that the man who came back to stop him has just stepped outside into the morning and pointed himself at the desert. The temple doors close behind him. The city opens ahead. He walks. He has known her name for 25 years. She has never heard his. This asymmetry has been with him since Subsal 7, filed alongside the other facts he carries that no one around him can access. The shape of a child's face he has not yet met, the sound of a door he will not let close. He has worked toward her existence as a free woman for longer than she has been alive. He does not think about this often. When he does, he files it and moves on. Because thinking about it in the wrong register produces something that is not useful and cannot be allowed to become weight. The search takes 3 years. He is methodical in the way of someone who has had a long time to learn the difference between patience and passivity. He works the Outer Rim's labor transit routes and station markets with force-augmented attention, not using the force as a tool of coercion or extraction, but as a sensitivity. The living force reading the specific texture of vulnerability and how people move through commercial spaces that are designed by financial architecture more than by explicit intent, to funnel people like Shmi toward outcomes that serve the architecture. He knows her trajectory in broad strokes. A free woman, moving through the Outer Rim's economic edges, losing ground to a system built to ensure that people who start losing ground lose it in one direction. He is 25 when he begins. He is 28 when he finds the thread. The station is Hutt-influenced in the way that most things in this sector are Hutt-influenced. Not flagrantly, not through direct administration, but through the specific commercial gravity of an entity that has been the largest economic presence in the region for 3 centuries. The labor broker whose records Qui-Gon accesses through a contact network that Dooku has maintained for 15 years, operates formally as an employment placement service. The distinction between placement and acquisition exists in the broker's records as a column header that switches designation depending on the nature of the transaction and the legal jurisdiction of the destination. Shmi Skywalker appears in the records as a potential acquisition target. 19 years old, flagged as possessing technical skills above the standard profile for her economic bracket, data processing, basic mechanical maintenance, above average literacy in 4 languages, listed as currently placed in temporary contract employment, listed as in debt to a housing cooperative that fronts, 3 ownership layers down, an entity connected to the broker. She has not yet been acquired. The debt is the mechanism, not large enough to be immediate, large enough to be permanent at her current income level. The broker's notes indicate a projected acquisition window of 6 to 8 months, pending confirmation that no family claims exist and no legal status complications would complicate the transfer. She is still free. The word still has not appeared in any of the broker's documentation because the broker does not think in terms of still. He thinks in terms of pending. Qui-Gon reads the file once and closes it. He finds her on the station's commercial level in the mid-morning, in a data processing office that occupies a narrow unit between a parts supply shop and a currency exchange. The office is the kind of space that communicates its own temporary nature in every surface. The desk is borrowed-looking, the equipment is functional but not maintained. The lighting suggests that whoever sets the maintenance budget has decided it is not a priority. She sits at a terminal with the posture of someone who has learned not to waste physical energy on environments that don't warrant it. She is not the woman he met on Tatooine. The woman he met was patient in the way that long endurance produces patience, not as a quality chosen, but as a quality that remains when others have been worn away. This woman is not patient. She is contained. The same quality, but before it has been converted by circumstance into its final form. She is young, and she is competent, and she is managing something that she is very good at not showing. He introduces himself at the office door, a Jedi investigating labor exploitation patterns in this sector, following a referral from a social services coordinator who flagged her employment situation for follow-up. He has the documentation. The social services coordinator exists. He arranged the referral 2 weeks ago. She receives this information with the careful attention of someone who has learned that attention is a resource to be spent precisely. She does not relax. She does not close. She listens, and then she asks questions, practical, specific, focused on mechanism rather than reassurance, and the questions tell him more about her than the file did. At approximately the 4th minute, she says, "Why me specifically?" He considers the true answer, which is 36 years long and contains a child who has not yet been born. He chooses the answer that is also true and shorter. "The Force brought me to you," he says, "and the Force doesn't make mistakes, even if I do." She looks at him for a long moment. He is 28 in body, young enough to look like someone still becoming something, not quite old enough to carry the unquestioned authority that age provides in these interactions. The expression she produces is not distrust exactly. It is the assessment of someone who has developed assessment as a survival skill and is currently using it on a Jedi who has said something that does not fit any of her categories. He lays out what he is offering: passage to a safe location, legal documentation establishing her free person status with clean chain of title, no gaps, no erasures, nothing that can be challenged by the cooperative or the broker or anyone connected to either, resources sufficient to establish a self-sustaining situation in a location he has already identified. No conditions attached to any of it. No obligation. She lets the offer sit for a moment. Then, "What do you get from this?" He considers how honest to be. He settles on the version that is honest and incomplete, the chance to do something right. The silence that follows is the silence of someone calculating the cost of trust against the cost of declining to trust. In a situation where the available options are asymmetric, he does not press. He waits because waiting is what he does now in this life, with better skill than he had in the first one. She says yes, not warmly, practically, with the specific pragmatism of someone who has learned to take useful things when they appear, because the galaxy provides them infrequently and without announcement. He builds the sanctuary with 20 years of accumulated Shadow Network capital and the patience of someone who understands the difference between a hiding place and a home. Tatooine's northern agricultural settlements are not prosperous. They are functional in the specific way of communities that have found a sustainable relationship with the planet, that does not offer prosperity and have stopped expecting it. The cooperative he identifies is legitimate: land-working families, inter-family trust, built over 2 generations, the specific social fabric of people who depend on each other for practical rather than sentimental reasons. The property he secures has clear title, no ambiguous ownership history, no financial encumbrances. The documentation he provides for Shmi establishes her legal identity with the thoroughness of something that has been constructed rather than recovered, built to hold. He does not build a hiding place. Hiding places are temporary. They communicate their own temporariness in how they're made, and temporary things become visible to people looking for temporary things. He builds a life, the kind that does not announce that it was placed, because it was placed with the same attention to genuineness that the desert gives to the formations it builds over centuries. He spends 3 years in and around the settlement. Not close. He keeps his distance in the specific way of someone who has decided that presence and proximity are not the same thing, and that the former can be provided without the latter becoming intrusive. He checks in periodically. He assists practically when help is available, useful and not suspicious in its consistency. He repairs machinery once, helps mediate a cooperative dispute once, disappears for 6 weeks and returns without explanation once. She adjusts to him the way one adjusts to a strange feature of the landscape that is always there and never quite explicable, not trusted, not distrusted, simply incorporated into the map of things that exist in her world. She asks him questions sometimes in the evenings when the desert temperature has dropped and there is time for conversation that isn't functional. He answers with the truth, in the portions of it that are available. Once she asks if he has family. He says no, then considers, then amends, not in the way she means. She does not push further. She is, he has come to understand, someone who does not push further when further seems like it would cost more than it returns. This is not incuriosity, it is economy. She has always known exactly what things cost. He does not tell her what is coming. He does not tell her about her son. It is the most sustained act of restraint in either of his lives, and it is not the one he performs willingly. He performs it because telling her would change the shape of what she is, would make her a person waiting for something rather than a person living, and the person living is the person her son needs to be born to. He has calculated this carefully and arrived at the conclusion and does not allow himself to revisit it. because revisiting it would not change it and would cost him something he cannot afford to spend. In the autumn of his 30th year in body, he feels Plagueis again, not nearby, nowhere near Tatooine. The signal is distant, directional, moving through the outer rim with the systematic patience of something conducting a search that has no deadline because it has no external accountability. The moon has rebuilt. He is working. The Force signature, when Qui-Gon reaches for it at the edge of his perception, carries the specific quality he has learned to associate with Plagueis' research rather than his combat or political operations. Not the cold deliberateness of manipulation, but something more focused, more internal, the quality of a mind pushing against a boundary that it has not yet found the correct instrument to breach. Midi-chlorian work, biological scale, the possibility assembles itself from components he has been holding separately since the Force Ghost years, because holding them separately was easier than confronting what they produce when combined. Palpatine's voice in the Senate, heard through the veil of death, in a body that was no longer a body, floating the idea that Plagueis had learned to influence the midi-chlorians to create life. The chosen one, born of no father, the Force creating Anakin as a counter to a darkness being introduced into the living Force's fabric at the cellular level. What if the counter required the introduction? What if Plagueis' experiments, his specific work in the Outer Rim's desert systems, his manipulation of midi-chlorians in the biological environments of worlds with Force-dense populations, were what prompted the Force to respond? What if Anakin exists because the Force looked at what Plagueis was doing and decided that the answer to an unprecedented darkness was an unprecedented light? What if removing Plagueis now, before the experiments reach the threshold the Force responds to, removes the trigger? He holds this in the settling desert dark, outside the house, with his back against the wall and his hands on the sand. The living Force does not answer the question, it does not give him certainty here, which is the only kind of confirmation he knows how to trust. What it gives him is a silence where the answer should be, a silence with weight and specificity, the kind that is not the absence of information, but the presence of something too large to be rendered in information. He cannot know. That is the answer. He cannot know, and acting on a probability that he cannot verify could eliminate the thing he has run 2 lives to protect. He waits. He tells himself, with the flat precision he has used for 25 years to handle the things that cannot be handled warmly, this is the calculation, this is the correct response to the calculation, and the feeling it produces in him is not a reason to revise it. Inside the house, Shmi Skywalker is alive and free, and working quietly by lamplight on a cooperative record she promised to have finished by morning. He places his palms on the warm sand. He holds them there. He waits for the Force to move. Anakin Skywalker is born in the 3rd hour of the desert night, and Qui-Gon is 3 rooms away, sitting with his back against the exterior wall and his hands flat on the sand. The living Force does not build toward it. It arrives. One moment the desert is the desert, vast, cooling in the dark, the muted conversation of nocturnal creatures in the middle distance, the specific quiet of a world that has never bothered to be anything other than what it is. And then, in the space between one breath and the next, the Force moves. Not metaphorically, not as sensation or impression, it moves. The way a tide moves, with the weight and direction of something that the living Force has been holding in reserve across an incalculable accumulation of time and has now released. He felt this before. He was a ghost when it happened in the original timeline, insubstantial, the veil of death between him and the moment, and it registered even through that distance. He knew, even as a presence without a body, that something had entered the galaxy that was too large to be a single life. He filed that knowledge and carried it across years of watching the consequences, and eventually carried it into a sparring sow, where a 13-year-old made a choice that was also a decision made in 2 seconds. He feels it now as a living man, and it is not smaller than he remembers. It is precisely the size it always was. He does not cry. He places his palm flat on the warm sand and holds it there until the wave of it passes through him and beyond, until the Force settles back into the ordinary register of this desert night with its cooling temperature and its stars. He counts those stars, a habit, something to do with the mind while the body integrates what just happened. He thinks of Sub-Sal 7. He thinks of a practice saber and a decision and 39 years he was given to spend in a particular direction. Then he stands. He goes back inside. Shmi is already thinking about the next thing by morning. He has come to recognize this about her across 12 years, the way she moves from one concluded event to the practical demands of the following one, as if completion and beginning occupy the same breath. She is exhausted in the specific way of someone who has survived something enormous, and she holds the child out toward him with both hands in a gesture that is not an offering. It is a presentation, the gesture of someone who has watched a strange man orbit their life for a long time and has decided, in the hours following the most significant night of her existence, that he has been asking a question that she is now in a position to answer. He takes the child. He has held infants before. Not this one in any version of anything. He looks at a human child approximately 7 pounds in weight, with the dark eyes of the newborn that do not yet focus and cannot yet make sense of the face 2 feet above them. The child's grip on his finger is unreasonable for a 12-hour-old. The grip of someone already trying to hold on to something. The midi-chlorian density reaches him without reaching. He does not have to look for it. It simply presses against his force sensitivity the way a large piece of furniture presses against a small room, reorienting the space around itself. It is absurd. It is higher than his memory suggested it would be, higher than anything recorded in the Order's history, and the living force around the child moves the way the force moves around nothing else in his experience, not amplified, not intensified, but oriented, the way water around a stone is oriented, everything finding its relationship to the thing at the center. He says, "Hello." The baby does not respond. He says to Shmi, still looking at Anakin, he'll want to know everything. He'll need someone who doesn't look afraid when he asks impossible questions. Shmi watches him with the expression she produces when she is deciding how far to press. Are you afraid of him? Of him? He considers the child's unfocused eyes, the grip, the force density that bends the room. No. Of what he could become without the right start? He meets Shmi's gaze. Yes. She looks at him for a long moment. He looks back. They have 12 years of the particular honesty that develops between people who are not given permission to be fully honest with each other, but have found the edges of what honesty is available, and those edges, over 12 years, have expanded to accommodate quite a lot. She takes the child back. She settles him. She does not ask any more questions. Plagueis arrives on Tatooine 6 months later. He is following the Force signature, an impossible density in the Outer Rim's field, the unmistakable product of his midi-chlorian experiments creating something he did not specifically design, but recognizes, with the precision of a scientist who has spent decades in this specific research, as the most significant result of that work. He is not coming in aggression, he is coming in inquiry. He wants to understand what he made and what it means for what he has been trying to make. Qui-Gon feels the dark side trace cross the planet's atmosphere in the early hours before dawn. He is awake. He has been sleeping lightly for 6 months. He dresses. He takes his lightsaber. He leaves a note on the table that Shmi will find in the morning. It does not explain anything, which she is accustomed to, and it says he will be back by midday, which is a reasonable estimate. He walks into the desert. The canyon is shallow, carved by ancient wind rather than water, the walls low enough that the sky above it is wide. The twin suns have not yet crested the dunes. The light is the particular pre-dawn blue that Tatooine offers for approximately 40 minutes each morning before the day makes its intentions clear. Qui-Gon arrives from the north. He waits. Plagueis comes from the east. He is lean in the way that the years of research have made him lean. Not weakness. The specific austerity of a being who has spent a decade redirecting every resource toward a single project and has allowed everything else to economize accordingly. He is damaged in ways that don't advertise themselves. He carries himself like the most dangerous thing in this desert, because he is accustomed to that being true, and because 27 years of continued existence have not given him reason to revise the assessment. He stops at the canyon's center. He looks at Qui-Gon across the sand with the composing eyes of someone assembling a classification in real time, and the silence is not long before he says, "You have been following me for 20 years. You have been following the wrong trail for 20 years, Qui-Gon says. A pause. The Mune's gaze moves briefly east, in the direction of the settlement, the direction of the Force signature he followed across the Outer Rim, the one that told him something significant had been made. The child is not yours. The words are flat and final. He was never yours. Plagueis is quiet for a moment. He is a being who has spent a very long time not being surprised. He is not surprised now. He is recalibrating, which is a different thing, the specific activity of a brilliant mind encountering new information and immediately testing it against existing architecture to find what holds and what must be rebuilt. His eyes find Qui-Gon's face with a particular quality of attention. "You have lived before?" he says. It is not a question he has had 20 years to work on the anomaly. the teenager on Sojourn who moved through his dark side suppression with a competence that had no business being in a 17-year-old body, who knew his cover name before being told, who felt, in the Force, like something placed rather than grown. 20 years to reach the only conclusion that fits. Yes, Qui-Gon says, then you know what I am. Yes, the moon looks at the space between them, the 30 feet of sand, the canyon walls, the lightening sky, and you came here alone. Yes, something crosses his composed face. Not alarm, the specific calculation of a tactician reviewing the available data and finding the configuration less favorable than expected. That seems like an error. It isn't. Qui-Gon holds his eyes. You made an error 20 years ago. You left. The fight begins. He does not fight to demonstrate anything. This is the distinction, the thing that separates what happens in this canyon from what happened on Sojourn, where he was preparing and probing and working with incomplete information. He has no incomplete information. He has spent 27 years in this body, working it to a condition of sustained excellence, carrying in his mind every detail he assembled across a Force Ghost's decades of observing the Sith, Plagueis' techniques, the specific mechanism of his dark side suppression, the way the living Force noise it generates can be moved through if you are willing to accept degraded precision and compensate with physical form. He is 39 years old in body and has not stopped training a single day since Subsal 7. The dark side suppression comes immediately and is immediately familiar. Not the same intensity as Sojourn. The research years have cost Plagueis something, but precise and targeted in the same way, reaching for his living Force attunement specifically. The signal blurs, the noise rises, he moves through it. He moves through it differently than he did at Sojourn because he has practiced moving through it. Specifically, deliberately for years, drilling Form 3 against suppressed Force conditions, learning to trust geometry and timing when signal becomes unreliable, finding the point where the body's trained memory is faster than perception, and learning to operate from there. He is not fighting blind, he is fighting with the specific faculty that Plagueis' technique cannot reach, the knowledge of how this goes, assembled across an entire prior lifetime plus 27 years of preparation in this one. Plagueis is extraordinary. He is also fighting someone who knows him. The canyon holds them for less time than it seems to, and at the end of it the dark side signature that has been present in Qui-Gon's Force perception since he first felt it 20 years ago on the wrong side of the Sessuena financial anomaly. Old, cold, patient, pressing. Fades. It fades the way smoke fades from a sealed room when the door is opened and the clean air has time to do its work. Not instantly, not dramatically. The way a thing that has been a constant presence departs when it stops being a constant presence, noticed most clearly in the specific quality of what remains. He stands in the early desert light, the living Force around him settles. Not into silence, the Force is not silent, it is never silent. It is alive in every grain of sand under his boots and every creature in the canyon walls and the blue morning sky and the settlement 3 miles east. It settles into the quality of quiet that follows the removal of something that was pressing against it for too long. A restoration of the original register. The desert as itself, without the counterpressure, he looks east. He cannot see the house from here. He does not need to. He can feel the child in the Force. That impossible density, warm and continuous, and completely unaware of any of this. A sun in the ether that does not know it is a sun because no one has yet told it what suns are, or what they do to everything around them. He will tell him. Not today, not for years, not in the language of prophecy or burden. In the language of questions treated without fear, which is the only language that works for this particular child, and which Qui-Gon has had a long time to learn. He cleans the sand from his hands. He begins the walk back. Plagueis is dead. What follows his death is not a drama. This is the thing that takes the longest to understand. For a man who has spent 36 years in a state of sustained operational alertness, that the ending of a threat does not announce itself with the weight the threat carried. The galaxy does not shudder. The Force does not ring like a struck bell. The grand plan simply has no one left to execute it, and a conspiracy built across decades on 2 people has no succession when both people are removed from the board. Plagueis cannot name an apprentice in death. Palpatine has not been made into a weapon. The structure collapses inward, without ceremony, in the way that structures collapse when the specific person holding them together is no longer there to hold them. What fills the space is ordinary. Palpatine is 43 years old at the time of Plagueis' death, a Naboo senator of considerable skill and entirely legitimate employment, whose ambition is real, and whose methods are sometimes questionable, and whose contempt for the majority of his colleagues is both genuine and not entirely without basis. He will spend the remainder of his political career trying to reform a Senate he finds profoundly insufficient, using tools that are occasionally sharp enough to cut their user, winning by the kind of narrow margins that satisfying political careers are actually made of. He is not the emperor. He is a man who needed a dark side teacher and 1,000 years of Sith patience to become the emperor, and neither of those things arrived. The galaxy can survive the senator from Naboo. The galaxy has survived far worse than brilliant men who think too highly of themselves. The Trade Federation's most corrupt architecture, the Shadow Ledger, the Shell intermediaries, the Senate committee influence, has been systematically exposed across 30 years of careful operation. The organization remains powerful. It is no longer pointed at anything specific. The banking clan absorbs Damask holdings without understanding what it has absorbed, under new management through the intergalactic banking clan that does not answer to a dead Sith Lord and does not know to look for what it inherited. Sifo Dyas, whose visions of mass death and the Order's end have been retreating like a tide for 15 years, channels his prophetic gifts toward institutional reform rather than unilateral action. The clone army he commissioned in another timeline is never commissioned here, because the catastrophe that made it seem necessary did not arrive. What he produces instead is a decade of Senate advocacy for Republic defense reform, slow, contested, imperfect, that ends in a modestly restructured appropriations framework insufficient for a galactic war that is not going to happen. This is the shape of 36 years of work, not clean, not complete, sufficient. Anakin at 3 years old reaches for things before they fall, not every time, not with the reliability of someone who has understood what they're doing, but often enough and specifically enough that Shmi notices and does not say anything about it, in the way she has learned not to say things about Qui-Gon's visits, or the quality of her legal documentation, or the fact that this particular settlement seems to have found over the years a sustainable equilibrium with a planet that does not generally provide equilibrium to anyone. She notices things. She files them. She extends the particular grace of a woman who has decided that some questions are better met with patience than interrogation. At 5, Anakin knows the Force exists because Qui-Gon told him, and he can feel it, and the feeling is not frightened because Qui-Gon was not frightened when he described it. He knows he is unusual because his mother told him, early and consistently, that unusual things are not problems to be ashamed of. They are questions to be curious about. He has accumulated, by 5 years old, a quantity of questions that would exhaust most adults, and the strange man who visits the settlement does not look afraid when he asks them. So he asks all of them. What Qui-Gon gives him is not the Jedi curriculum. It is something older. The Force is the life of all living things, and sensitivity to it is a responsibility rather than an elevation. And power exercised without care for what it touches is not power. It is damage dressed as intention. He does not tell the boy he is the chosen one. The prophecy can wait for an age when Anakin can receive it as context, rather than as crown. There is no timeline pressing against them. There is no dark architecture using urgency as a tool. There is only a child in a desert asking questions, and the answers should be given at the pace that the child can carry them, which is different from the pace that the answers deserve. Yoda calls him to Coruscant in the 35th year after Subsale 7, and the full council convenes. Mace Windu is present. He is 37 years old, formidable in the specific way of someone who has been building toward this period in his career for a decade, with a Shatterpoint ability that has been quietly perceiving the fault lines in Qui-Gon's Force presence since the moment he walked into the chamber, reading the specific places where something has broken and been rebuilt. The structural evidence of a life that has not proceeded in any ordinary sequence. He has been aware of the Dooku Qui-Gon anomaly for years. He has not been able to classify it. He is the kind of man who finds unclassifiable things professionally unacceptable. Qui-Gon gives them the shape of what was done and not the mechanism. A Sith threat, he tells them, operating through financial structures and political manipulation for decades before he identified it. 2 Sith, a master and an intended apprentice. The master is dead. The apprentice was intercepted before the grooming took hold and redirected into legitimate channels where his ambition has found insufficient but survivable expression. The specific financial and political operations he and Dooku conducted across 30 years have been documented. He will provide the records. The threat is neutralized. How he knew what he knew and when, and with what degree of certainty, that is the Force's business, and he intends it to remain so. The chamber is quiet for a moment with the weight of it. Mace speaks when the quiet has lasted long enough to have made its point. He does not look at Qui-Gon when he speaks. He looks at the specific place in the Force where the fault lines in a person are most readable, the structural fractures, the rebuilt places, the points of pressure that changed everything. "There's something else," he says. "Something you haven't told the Council." "Yes," Qui-Gon says. "The Chosen One prophecy." "Yes." The silence that follows occupies the chamber the way the Force occupies the temple, in every surface simultaneously, without asking permission. "He has been born," Qui-Gon says. "He is safe. He is being trained in a manner consistent with his nature and not consistent with current temple protocols, which I recognize and which I believe is the right choice for this particular child. He meets Mace's eyes. When he is ready to know the Order will know he exists. That conversation will happen on his terms and at his pace, not under the weight of prophecy and institutional need." Mace's jaw tightens slightly. "That is not the Council's decision to..." Yoda's voice is very quiet, and it does not raise itself, and it does not need to. The sound contains 800 years of knowing exactly what it is doing. He sits with his eyes partly closed, and the chamber around him rearranges itself in the specific way chambers rearrange themselves when Yoda has decided something. "Trust Qui-Gon, I do," he says. "In this, and in this child, a pause that is also a period. Wait, we will." Mace does not argue with that. No one has ever found the method. He finds Dooku in the temple gardens afterward, which is where Dooku has taken to walking when the Council's collective presence has become what he calls, in the dry shorthand they have used for 30 years, heavy with itself. He is 67 years old. He moves through the garden with the careful authority of someone whose body has become a slower instrument than it was, but who has never allowed slower to become an excuse. Qui-Gon is 45. He is approaching the age at which he died the first time. They walk without particular direction. The garden is quiet in the late afternoon. Other Jedi have cleared it in the unconscious way that space is clear around people who are having conversations that the space does not feel entitled to interrupt. In the distance, the temple hums with the presence of thousands of living Force-sensitive beings. Thousands of lives that continue because two people ran an operation for 35 years and declined to advertise it. Dooku says, without preamble and without looking at him, "You saved me. I want you to know that I know that." "I gave you different facts to work with," Qui-Gon says. "You made the choices. That is a gracious way to avoid taking credit. I've had a lot of practice." The garden settles around them. A bird moves somewhere in the lower planting beds. Somewhere below, the city of Coruscant continues to be itself. "Did I die?" Dooku says. "In the life you came from." A pause. It is not the pause of uncertainty. It is the pause of someone selecting precisely how much of the truth to give. "Yes," Qui-Gon says. "How? You made a different choice than the one you made here. The right choice or the wrong one?" His voice carries no judgment in it. It is the voice of a man reporting terrain. "You made it as someone who had lost every anchor. You hadn't lost any of yours this time." Dooku is quiet. He looks at the garden. The specific quality of looking that he produces when he is processing something that he will not rush. After a moment, the boy on Tatooine, "Yes, I should like to meet him someday." "I think he would like that," Qui-Gon says. "He has a great many questions about things I can't explain well. You'd be more useful than me for approximately half of them." Another pause. Then Dooku produces something he does not produce often, and did not produce toward anything this genuine. A small, real smile. "Send my regards to the desert," he says. The twin suns are setting over Tatooine, the sky in two shades of amber that the galaxy's painters have been attempting for generations without quite capturing. And Qui-Gon sits in the open doorway of the house with his back against the frame. He is 48 years old. He has reached the age at which he died on Naboo in a life that is now very far behind him. He looks like a man who was given an enormous amount of time and used it with care. He looks, if you know what to look for, like someone who has been tired for 35 years and is only now, in this specific doorway, on this specific evening, beginning to stop. Anakin is in the sand beyond the house. 9 years old, sun-browned, loud in the way of children who have never been told that their own noise is inconvenient. He is chasing something, a small creature of the type that the northern desert produces, compact and fast, reversing directions with the abrupt unpredictability of something that has evolved specifically to be difficult to catch. Anakin is laughing at each reversal. He has not yet decided to catch it, which means he is playing rather than hunting, which is the correct choice. Qui-Gon files this without entirely knowing why it matters to him. Shmi's voice comes from inside the house, calling them for the evening meal, the voice carrying the particular warmth of someone who has made a practice of ordinary things and found, across years of making that practice, that ordinary things are not actually ordinary. The smell of something good, the sound of a house managing an evening. Anakin looks up from the sand. He looks across the distance to the doorway, to the man sitting in it, and his face carries the expression of a child who has never been afraid of what he doesn't know because the person in the doorway made it clear, very early, that questions are not dangerous. That the Force is not a mystery to be frightened of, but a presence to be curious about. That unusual things are not problems. They are the beginning of inquiry. He raises his hand and waves. Qui-Gon raises one hand in return, a small gesture, an ordinary gesture, the kind that passes between people who have established enough of a common language that the language does not need to be large. He thinks of a sparring Sal, briefly, without sentimentality. A training drone, a decision made in 2 seconds, in a child's body, in the particular amber light of a Coruscant afternoon. The decision to choose option C, to demonstrate rather than confess. To begin the long work, he did not waste it. The suns go down, the boy comes inside, and the living Force, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, across 40 years of preparation and loss, and the kind of love that operates without naming itself, is simply alive. Let us know what you'd like to see next. End.